passwords. We already mentioned this is the number one critical spot when it comes to security. Why? Well, we use passwords to unlock things, usually online accounts. And passwords wouldn't be used if there wasn't for something special that they unlock, right? This can be anything from private information to money or financial information, and many other things that other people would find useful having, but luckily we have it protected by a password. So it's important to understand what makes a good password and what makes a bad password. Okay, first thing is that usernames and passwords are also called credentials. And credentials are all important when logging into something. You could use an username to log into a website or a device. This is most common to come in combination with password for many online social media accounts. You could also use your email to log in. And for you people that like even more security, you might have two-factor authentication setup, and even after you provide a username and the password, it will still ask for something like a code from your mobile phone. Now, two-factor authentication is a must-have for any online account that offers it as an option. My advice is to always have it enabled when you can, but we will mention it a little bit more after we cover passwords. So, first of all, how does a regular login process look like? Well, if we don't go technical about this, it looks something like this. You, as a user, send your credentials to the website. Then the website checks whether those credentials are valid, and if they are, the website gives you your information or it logs you into your own account. Now, the main validation point is the password itself. This is what you should keep most private and never tell it to anyone. I know everyone says it, but it's true. Your username or email can easily be found out online. That's why if your password is also compromised, there's nothing stopping an attacker to log in and impersonate you. There are many ways a hacker can steal your password, and we're just going to mention most common ways. Remember what I said at the beginning of this workshop, that the most common attacks used on the internet are phishing attacks, right? Phishing is number one way to steal someone's password. We will explain later in detail how exactly does it work, but in short words, it's essentially an attacker faking the web page to look like it's the original page and you entering your credentials into the fake page that's set up by the hacker. Then the hacker gets your credentials in plain text and they can navigate to the real website and log in with your credentials. Another way attacker can get your password is by running something called brute force attacks. Now, brute force attacks are less common to work, but they do work if your password is weak. A brute force attack is essentially a hacker running a bunch of random passwords with your username and trying to get in by guessing your password. Now, depending on the occasion, brute force attacks can be very fast, from trying a couple of passwords per second to running tens of thousands of passwords per second as a guess. So if your password is weak, this will most likely be able to break it. And the third way is an attacker running a keylogger on your machine. Now, this is the least common way, but it does happen, especially in targeted attacks. You infect your system with a keylogger when you download a malware and run it. Now, you might be wondering, well, why would I ever download a malware? Well, the thing is, if you don't have enough knowledge about this, it will be easy to trick you into running a program and executing keylogger with it. Hackers are very good at making their malware look like a legit program. This keylogger would then capture every keystroke you input in the keyboard, including all of your usernames and passwords. Okay, but right now we will focus on mitigating brute force attacks. And the other two attacks we will talk about when we get into antivirus section and into phishing section of this workshop. Okay, so let's think about it. What is the best way to mitigate brute force attacks? Well, it's simple. We just need to create a strong password that is highly unlikely to be in any major password lists that hackers use when brute forcing. When crafting a strong password, there are two main things to keep in mind, and that is how many characters does your password have? It makes a big difference whether your password is 6 characters long or 15 characters long. Usually the more the better, since less characters will make it easier to crack. The second thing to keep in mind is which characters do you have in your password. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, if you have lowercase, uppercase letters, different symbols and signs, it will be much harder to crack your password than if your password was, for example, only lowercase letters. That's why many websites nowadays tell you to add different numbers and symbols to make your password stronger, and they won't let you have a weak password. Let's see an example of a weak password and of a little stronger password. So the weak password would be this one, 8 characters long, and the password is literally just one word, password. No variety, very guessable word, and also fun fact, very common. That's right, many people use password that's just password. Perhaps they sometimes add some numbers at the end like password 123, but that doesn't really make any difference whatsoever. If you have a password like this, then change it as soon as possible, but I would assume it's already too late if your account was ever under attack. An example of strong password with the same amount of characters would be something like this. As you can see, no common words are inside password, or should I say, no words at all. A password like this is highly unlikely to be cracked, even though it has same amount of characters as previous one. Now, let's see a list of reasons why the password, which is just a word password, is a bad one, and the other one is a good password. Most of the reasons we already mentioned, but let's go through all of them real quick. So the reasons password is a bad password would be these ones. First thing is that it is a recognizable word. Anything that is inside English dictionary and is a common word is considered a weakness if used inside your password. Another bad thing is that it doesn't have way too many characters. Now, we would argue that 8 characters is enough since it's mostly the bottom minimum on most websites required when creating a password, but more would definitely be better. And possibly the biggest problem here is that it only has one type of characters, which in this case is lowercase letters. Now, on the other hand, the other password has all the opposite positive things. It itself as a password makes no sense, so it doesn't have any recognizable word in it from English dictionary. It has a mixture of random characters and signs, which makes it way harder to brute force, and it also has a combination of upper and lowercase letters. Now, is this an ideal type of password to have? Well, it does have only 8 characters, so what we could define as a really strong password would be something like this. Matter of fact, the more character it has, the better. 30 character password is much better than 20 character password. But here we come back to the same problem, and that is we actually must memorize this entire password in order to log in to different accounts, right? And that is the hard part. Memorizing this would take time. And you would most likely write it down somewhere on the paper to be able to remember it, which produces another vulnerability, which is someone finding that paper and figuring out your password from there. Another even bigger problem is that you most likely wouldn't bother creating tens of different passwords as strong as this one, and you would use the same password for multiple different websites, which is also a huge vulnerability. If one website gets hacked and your credentials get leaked, then anyone can use those same credentials to compromise the rest of your accounts, since you use the same password. So the only correct way to go about this is to have different password for every website. This way, even if one website gets compromised, the other accounts of yours are still secure due to a different password. But once again, this will be even harder to remember than one password. So where am I going with this? Well, all of this leads to one thing, and that is using password managers. What are password managers? Well, they're software applications used to safely store your credentials for various online accounts. The main things password managers do is they can generate highly secure passwords for you, encrypt them, and store them in a safe place. You typically only need to know one password that unlocks all the others, and that one password is called the master password. Now, there are two main types of password managers: the ones that store your data on cloud and the ones that store your data on your own machine. You might be asking now, well, what if the cloud password manager gets hacked or breached? Well, first of all, it rarely happens, and even if they do get breached, your passwords are highly encrypted, so even then the hackers wouldn't be able to get them, in plain text at least. Now, without getting into too many technical detail, let me show you where you can get password managers for yourself. But before we do that, there is one quick thing I want to mention regarding password safety. Highly secured passwords can only get you so far. That's why, to even more increase your account security, make sure to activate two-factor authentication. That is another layer of security in case your password gets breached. You can set up two-factor authentication so that you get code via email or your mobile phone. Not every website has this option, but the ones that do, make sure you activate it on them. Nonetheless, let's get straight into showing you different password managers and where you can get them. Okay, now let's take a look at different websites of different password managers. So I pulled out a couple of them, which are one of the most famous password managers and widely used. And usually when you visit a website of a password manager or of an antivirus software, they will preach about having 100% security, but we already know that 100% security doesn't really exist. However, they do help us increase it. The first password manager is this NordPass password manager, and as you can see, they got the personal plan and business plan. You can also take a look at this link where it explains how exactly it works. So before you actually start using it, you can figure out exactly what this password manager does and what type of features it has. Another really known password manager is this one. It's called 1Password. You have an option to try it out for free, which I always do recommend first, just so you can introduce yourself to it and just so you can figure out whether that password manager suits you the best. You can schedule a demo, get started, and check out all of the other features that this password manager has. The third one, and also a known password manager, is LastPass. You will notice that most of them have these two types of plans, which is personal for personal use or business in case you want to use the password manager in your company for all the employees and workers that have access to the company data. And since they do have access to the company data, you most likely want to have all of that secured. Once again, this also has an option to see how this works, a little bit more detailed guide than for the NordPass, so you can take a look at this and figure out whether this password manager is for you. And last but not least, this might be one of the oldest password managers, which is also open source and free to use, and this is KeePass. A very simple website. You have the latest release right here, you have the date when it was released, and you have a short description why they recommend using KeePass as a password manager. Nonetheless, feel free to use any one that you want. They're rather easy to use, so there shouldn't be any technical problems about it. And whichever one you choose, it will be much better than having weak passwords and using the same passwords for every website. Nonetheless, now that we covered the passwords and mentioned the password managers as a possible option to increase the security of your passwords, now let's continue to perhaps equally important topic, which is called browser security.